Hello, Tom Maguire. So I just want to review the new book by David Attenborough, A Life on Our Planet. There's a Netflix film version of this as well, which is really, really good. I highly recommend that. I know, as I often say, this channel is mainly about personal development, but I've said before that I do read other books as well. I'm very into non-fiction. I read the occasional fiction and I will review that as well sometimes. But mainly it's personal development. I'm obsessed and passionate about personal development. Follow me at Maguire Total Coaching on Facebook for daily motivation, inspiration, videos, advice. I'm a life coach. I've got my own business. So, I'm coming from decent experience. I love personal development. Um, but I just think if you take personal development seriously, if you take it as seriously as I take it, you've got to become responsible. You have to take responsible for your own development and your own growth, but you have to be responsible for future generations. You have to be responsible for the world that you live in as well. It's no good just saying, I'm going to make millions of pounds and screw the rest of you. I don't care what damage I do. If that is your attitude, then you're likely probably not to succeed, but you're also just going to end up fairly miserable and bitter and resentful. And that isn't really what we want. If you want to develop yourself properly and become the best version of you, you have to develop that sense of responsibility for other people as well. So I have a huge sense of responsibility for my children. My parents had a huge sense of responsibility for me, their parents for them, and I want to do that for my kids as well. So the thought of leaving my kids in a world that has been completely damaged by pollution, by raping the seas of fish, by destroying the fields, taking all the soil out because we're desperate to make as much food as possible and ruining farming, all those things, the ice caps melting, wildlife disappearing, all that stuff just makes me feel pretty sick, to be fair. I don't want my kids to go into that kind of world, and I don't want their kids to. I don't want to be sort of looked back on in 100 years, 200 years, however long, as some kind of fool from back then who knew no better and didn't care and didn't take responsibility. I would rather be one of the few people who they can look back on and say, fair play, that Tom Maguire, he did the best that he could at the time with what he had to try and improve things. And that is basically now one of my goals. So I'm always talking about goal setting. I've got lots of different goals. I haven't shared all of them with you necessarily. But I have lots of different goals. One of my goals has always been to own land and to protect it. Now, that's kind of grown a little bit. I'd like to have a little bit more land, really kind of protect it, stop people from building on it, and maybe even do some kind of eco farming or something like that. I would love to do that. Yeah, fantastic. I was born on a pig farm, and I used to go back there to visit the farmer there years later and go out, tend to the cows and stuff. I used to absolutely love it. It was beautiful on a farm in Cardenham in Cornwall. It was absolutely stunning. God's country, basically. So yeah, I have a real love for the countryside, and to think that I wouldn't take any kind of responsibility for that is not acceptable, really, for me. So, but this book is really, really good. This book will kind of depress you in some ways. There's horrible statistics. It kind of makes you feel like things are hopeless at some points. But then he also talks about things that are happening for the better and things that we can do still to turn things around. But he does very much give you the sense that we haven't got very much time at all, that we are literally getting to the point of no return. If not, we're pretty much already there. I think he's talking literally like 10 years, basically. If we carry on the way we are, then we're going to be setting off a negative kind of chain reaction, basically. And you can choose to believe that or not. You've got the Trump types and people like that who just say that, global warming, sorry, is a load of rubbish and stuff. But it's convenient for people like that to say it, isn't it? It's convenient to be arrogant and cocky and have your, be a billionaire or whatever it is and not pay any tax and just say that the world's absolutely fine and just be completely selfish. Anyone can do that's easy. There are plenty of people like that around. And maybe there is some truth that potentially some of the science isn't necessarily as accurate as it could be, but I think there seems to be an overwhelming amount of evidence at the minute to suggest that things definitely need to change. And I think we can see that for ourselves as well, really. There's a lot of evidence, and he talks about how wilderness, the population of wilderness has absolutely disappeared. The number of species has completely disappeared. It's gone down by like 50% in 50 years or something, or in his lifetime anyway, and he's 93. Crazy numbers, the parts of carbon in the atmosphere, all sorts of things. The fact that the temperature's gone up in the last 100 years more than it did in the last 10,000 or something crazy. All the usual stuff that you probably find quite boring and depressing, but he goes into it in a way that is really good. It's David Attenborough. He narrates as well. And what a fantastic guy to be in his 90s, still working really hard, still getting books out, still doing film documentaries on Netflix. Isn't that someone to kind of aspire to be, really? And some people might say, and I've heard this plenty of times before, if I had that much money, I wouldn't carry on working. I'd be on the beach. Like, really, you just lie on the beach all the time, would you? You just be lazy and just get drunk and just smoke and get fat. Well, personally, I wouldn't actually. I think when you get to the stage of when you understand personal development properly and you realise how important it is to have purpose and meaning in your life, and when you find something you feel passionate about, you want to do that for the rest of your life. You want to do that till your dying day. And actually, that's clearly what he's doing. He's in his 90s. He's still doing it. He's still passionate about it. He's still changing things. He's still having a positive impact on people. He's just recently gone onto Instagram as well, which is quite interesting. He's got how many millions of followers. So, fair play to him. I think he's a bit of a hero personally. So this book is fantastic. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it because that kind of ruins it really, but I highly recommend the audio version. It's narrated by him. Starts off in the 30s, him as a boy, this really nice image of him going out into the countryside, cycling out and kind of exploring, which is something that made me feel a little bit sad because it felt as though I'd never really done that, even though I was brought up in the countryside and I did used to do that kind of thing. The 1930s are going to be pretty different to the 1980s. There would have been much more kind of wildlife, less cars and all that sort of thing. He talks about how privileged he is to live the life that he's lived, all the things that he's seen and done, and it's just really lovely. But at the same time, you have that sense of dread when he's telling you each year or each 5 years or 10 years, however long it is, however quickly he marches forward, how much the population of the world's gone up. Started at 3.5 billion in the 30s and ends up at 7.5 billion in today. And each time wilderness is disappearing, species are disappearing, carbon's going up, so that's quite depressing. But then he talks about some of the positive stuff that's going on. Morocco being a bit of a leader in, I think it's solar power or something. They've got some kind of special solar power system which will really benefit their economy in years to come when it starts to sort of pay them back. So they've kind of bitten the bullet with that, which is positive. You've got New Zealand, who I think he says that they started talking about GDP being less of a priority, because GDP has been and seems to have always been a priority for every country. And whilst we're trying to grow all the time, constantly focusing on growing, that's when we're doing the damage. That's when we're overfishing the seas. That's when we're raping the land of nutrients and over farming and pulling down trees and all those things, because we're trying to grow all the time. He says we need to be like the rainforest. We need to get to a stage where we're happy with our size and then just keep honing things and kind of trimming and kind of just improving. But unfortunately, human nature would suggest we're unlikely to do that, I would say. But yeah, and some of the things about fishing, overfishing and stuff's really frightening. He makes the point that you've only got to leave the seas for a few years for them to really get back to full strength for fish to breed and things. And he talks about an island somewhere where I suppose the leader of the island, whatever his name was, I can't remember. I think they were a tribe of some kind. They just basically decided there was no, whenever it gets difficult, whenever fish kind of numbers deplete, he stops it altogether. He puts a ban, and that works really well. He's done that for years, and the fish come back and everything's fine again, even if there's a demand from tourists and things. But yeah, really interesting book. It's completely relevant to personal development. You've got to take personal responsibility. You've got to be aware of things like this, of what's going on. You can't just go through life trying to make money and having goals, but at the same time ignoring the fact that the world around you is disappearing and isn't going to be there potentially for your kids, if your grandkids. What good is it developing yourself if you're not going to do anything about that and take responsibility? So please subscribe. I will be doing another video very soon. I've got a book that I've just read called English Pastoral and Inheritance, which is another unusual one for me to do potentially, but it's about a guy who is a farmer up north in Britain. And he's basically talking about similar stuff that David Attenborough is talking about. He's talking about how farming has just completely gone wrong. There's been pressure from, supermarkets or from society, basically, to make food as quick as possible, as cheap as possible. And he goes into that. And it sounds boring, but it's not. It's really, really interesting. It's really nicely written. It's really kind of passionate and heartfelt. It's really, really good. It's one of my favourite books so far this year, actually. So I'll be reviewing that in a minute as well. But yeah, please like and subscribe. Please follow on Facebook at Maguire Total Coaching. And I will speak again soon. Cheers.